At Tribhuvan International Airport in Nepal, a Bombardier Q400 aircraft becomes uncontrollable while landing. Although it was a routine flight, the pilot forgets to lower the landing gear while landing the plane on the runway. Additionally, the plane is flying at a much higher altitude than required. None of the passengers on board have any idea about what is going to happen to them. Somehow, the pilot manages to land the plane on the runway but is unable to stop it. Eventually, the plane veers off the runway and crashes into the airport's boundary wall. Out of the 71 people on board, 51 lose their lives on the spot. This tragic story is of US Bangla Airlines Flight 211, which teaches us how a small mistake can lead to a massive disaster. But the question arises, why did this accident happen, and could it have been avoided? Let's try to understand the details. But before starting the video, we request you to subscribe to our channel, as creating this type of content takes a lot of time and effort. Your one subscription will give us great encouragement. So, let's start the video. This incident happened on March 12, 2018. At Dhaka's Shahjalal International Airport, around 12 p.m., 67 passengers started boarding the Bombardier Q400 aircraft. Out of these 67 passengers, 33 were Nepalese, 32 were Bangladeshi, and 1 passenger was from the Maldives. Among them were 2 children, and with 4 crew members included, a total of 71 people were on board this plane. In fact, this US Bangla Airlines Flight 211 was supposed to travel from Dhaka to Kathmandu's Tribhuvan International Airport in Nepal, which was a short 2-hour flight and also a routine flight that flew 4 times a week from Dhaka to Kathmandu. Talking about the plane, the Bombardier Q400 used for this flight was a small aircraft with a seating capacity of 36 passengers. This plane was first delivered to Scandinavian Airlines in 2001 and had been used by 3 different airlines for 12 years before being purchased by US Bangla Airlines in 2014. Before this flight, the plane had completed 28,649 takeoff cycles. All 4 crew members on board the plane were Bangladeshi. The command of Flight 211 was in the hands of 52-year-old Captain Abid Sultan. Abid had previously served as a pilot in the Bangladesh Air Force and had 5,500 hours of flying experience. Out of this, he had 1,700 hours of experience flying the Q400 aircraft. Apart from the captain, the command of the first officer of Flight 211 was in the hands of 25-year-old Prithula Rashid. Interestingly, Prithula was the first female pilot of this airline. She had joined US Bangla Airlines in July 2016 and had a total flying experience of 390 hours. Out of this, Prithula had spent 240 hours flying the Q400 aircraft. This meant that both pilots had considerable experience flying the Bombardier Q400 aircraft, so there was no reason for any mistake or panic. However, this was Prithula's first journey to Kathmandu, and she had no idea that this would be her last flight. Anyway, all tasks related to this flight were completed on time, including routine checks and refueling before the flight. At 12:51 p.m., the plane took off. The takeoff was completely smooth, and after ascending for some time, the plane stabilized. Within 2 hours, the plane was very close to its destination, Tribhuvan International Airport. During the entire flight, nothing happened that could have indicated a potential accident. Seeing their destination ahead, the pilots contacted ATC, Air Traffic Control, and received a response that the path was completely clear and they could land on runway 2. Hearing this, the pilots began reducing the altitude of the plane and proceeded towards runway 2. Everything was going perfectly when suddenly the plane, which was heading straight towards the runway, turned right. The sudden turn of the plane caused concern for both the captain and the co-pilot. Captain Abid quickly turned off the autopilot mode and took control of the plane manually. He suspected that there might be some issue with the plane's autopilot. In this situation, he decided to land the plane manually and started directing it towards the runway. The pilot now had to manually decide how much to lower the plane. However, The pilot made a slight miscalculation, due to which the plane did not descend as low as it should have during the landing. As a result, instead of landing at the start of the runway, the plane touched down in the middle. Since this was a tabletop runway, the pilot did not have a long enough runway to stop the plane. The pilot applied the brakes with full force, but the plane's speed was so high that it could not stop. Crossing the entire runway, the plane crashed into the boundary wall of the airport, 300 meters away. The rescue team reached the spot immediately, but despite their efforts, 51 out of the 71 people on board lost their lives. The question arises, why did this accident happen? Why did the plane suddenly turn in the wrong direction before landing, and who was at fault? To understand this, we need to look back a little. In reality, this entire accident occurred due to a small mistake by the pilot. How? Let me explain. When any plane begins its journey, during takeoff, the pilot enters all the necessary details into the FMS, Flight Management System, such as the airport the plane is heading to, the route to be followed, and the expected landing time, among other details. Based on this information, the autopilot system lands the plane. Typically, while entering these details, the runway number is not added because it is difficult to predict many hours in advance which runway will be available upon arrival at the airport. Since Tribhuvan International Airport is a very busy airport, Captain Abid Sultan also did not enter a runway number in the FMS for Flight 211. Instead, he chose to proceed using a holding pattern. In a holding pattern, the autopilot does not land the plane directly but keeps it circling above the airport. This is common at busy airports where clearing the runway may take some time. The plane continues to circle above the airport until ATC, Air Traffic Control, grants permission to land on a specific runway. Flight 212 landed a bit that same day of Flight 217, proceeded toward its destination using this holding pattern. However, the problem arose when both pilots forgot that they were in a holding pattern. The plane continued moving forward in the holding pattern. Upon reaching Kathmandu Airport and receiving clearance from ATC, the plane reached the ground on time in the FMS. As soon as the autopilot, following the holding pattern, made a right turn to circle the airport, both pilots panicked. In this state of panic, they made several wrong decisions, which ultimately led to the accident. When the plane turned right, the pilots misunderstood it as an error in the autopilot system and immediately took manual control of the plane to land it themselves. Tribhuvan Airport, located in a hilly area with a tabletop runway, is extremely challenging to navigate without any autopilot assistance. First, tabletop runways are very short, and second, calculating how much to increase or decrease altitude in hilly areas is incredibly difficult to do manually. And the pilots were well aware of these challenges, which created a tense atmosphere in the cockpit. In this panic, the first mistake occurred when the pilots failed to lower the plane to the required altitude as it approached the runway. In fact, they were so preoccupied with managing altitude that they forgot to deploy the landing gear. Finally, at the last moment, they lowered the landing gear, but by this time, the plane landed in the middle of the runway instead of at the start. In this situation, the pilot wasted no time and applied the brakes with full force because he knew very well that if the plane did not stop on the runway, no one inside would survive. Both pilots made every possible effort to stop the plane, their anxiety at its peak. Even the passengers in the back began to sense that something was seriously wrong with the plane. People started praying for their safety. The advanced braking system caused the plane's wheels to stop rotating upon braking, but the plane's speed was so high that it continued to glide forward. It crossed the safety area and, at very high speed, crashed into the airport's boundary wall. The plane crashed into the boundary wall. This collision's impact and the fire that broke out in the plane claimed the lives of 51 people. The rescue team immediately reached the crash site and transported all the injured and deceased to the hospital. The investigation concluded that the captain's decision to disengage autopilot and attempt a manual landing was a very poor judgment which caused the accident. This one wrong decision led to several subsequent mistakes. If the pilot had not turned off autopilot, the crash might have been prevented. However, we can only speculate on these matters, as past events cannot be changed. What can be done is to pray for the peace of the souls of those who lost their lives in this accident. You can like this video and comment to offer your prayers. That's all for today. We'll return soon with another case study. Until then, goodbye and take care.